Um, hi everyone, welcome back for our session called Insecure Accessibility and the Future Interface with Gregg Vanderheiden. My name is Megan. I am going to be your monitor for this session. Currently I am wearing a dress with a flowery brown and black shirt. And I hope that you are having a very great afternoon. I'm so great I use she and her pronouns, and welcome Gregg, Dr. Vanderheiden, for coming on the on the on the session.
Would you like me to begin?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you. I'm not going to be using slides for this presentation for maximum accessibility. And I also have just posted in the chat a link to a Future of Interface workshop that we just did recently with Vince Cerf. And it contains not only more information about this, but more information about just interfaces and future and what's going on going forward that you would find interesting. I'm going to talk about adding an entirely different approach to accessibility than we currently use. So first, why am I doing that? Because it's going to have policy and regulation and all sorts of implications. We are currently using a combination of asking industry and all website designers to design all things to be accessible to all people. And then we're relying on assistive technologies to help reach those that are failed to be reached by this first approach. Now, we've had a lot of success and advances in both areas. However, we're still failing for most people. About 3% of homepages are less. Some people say it's a higher number, but it turns out to still be a very minority number of websites that really are accessible. And the percentage of products and things that are being created is even lower. And all of these only apply to some people with some types, degrees, and combinations of disability. Cognitive language and learning is far behind, but so are other areas. Blindness. We talk about people who are blind having screen readers, but there's a whole group, section of the blindness population who can't use screen readers, who can't figure out how to use the iPhone's accessibility features for people who are blind. And think about it. What do they have access to? So AT only works for Windows and Mac OS. Everything else, you usually can't hook up AT. It's closed. And increasingly, we're seeing things be closed. And as I said before, both for built-in features, which only cover some disabilities, and for AT, there are many people who can't use them, or AT isn't available for them. And that's not likely to work in the future either. And in fact, it's likely to get worse. So it's not that we shouldn't keep doing these things. It's just that this is not enough. There's going to be more and more closed products where you can't install or connect AT. Microsoft recently, a few years ago, tried to move toward a model where it was more like an iOS or Android model of apps on their computers for using them in all the schools. And their AT won't work in those kinds of situations. A lot of the AT, because they're all sandboxed for security. Built-in accommodations are less than what AT could offer. And even there, it's like one size for each disability. There is a feature or a few features, but none of them cover all of the different areas. Products are heading in directions where security is giving more and more lockdown systems, and digital interfaces are appearing everywhere. It's not just on computers. We're finding them on our thermostats, just there's almost no place that you can't find these digital interfaces, and they will continue to go forward. It's actually cheaper to make a digital interface than a mechanical one. It doesn't make sense, but it's true. And as these become digital, a lot of people who could live independently are finding they can't live independently. We're increasing disability, if you will, by moving everything to digital interfaces for those people who can't figure out how to use them. Now we have immersive coming along with AR and VR and all the different types of things, which you think now are, oh, those are for gaming and whatever. And that's what they used to say about, computing and stuff. This new display is going to show up everywhere in employment, in jobs, in training, in school, in classrooms. And we don't really have any good solutions in sight. So as access to digital has never been more important, at the same time, we are nowhere near providing it access today, and we're losing grounds if we only rely upon the approaches we've been doing. However, over the next 10 to 20 years, we're really going to be seeing immense changes, and it will give us some new opportunities for AT. But again, a big thing is it's going to allow us to also consider a completely new approach. Some of the advances we're going to see. Linguistic transformations are going to be seamless. That means anything requiring semantic understanding, not like the LLMs today, which can spout out things and they look really interesting, but they don't really know what they're saying, which is why they say silly things sometimes. But we're really get into semantics, meaning that we can shift the grade level. We can change languages. We can simplify English. We can do things that we couldn't do today. Sign language, we'll have automated sign language, both production and recognition, and it'll be very good. Static and time-based scene analysis. This is the ability to just describe what you see in front of you. It's going to get better and better, and eventually we will be able to have automated visual and audio descriptions so that these things can be generated automatically. At first, it'll only be describing what things are, what things look like, but eventually it can also get to the point where it can describe what's going on. Like somebody is angry, somebody's, giving things that you can see in people's faces, paralinguistics that you can't hear and don't see in captions can be captured. They're going to be much more personalizable interfaces on a personal level, and we'll actually have intelligent agents that can run entirely locally. That is, in your house for privacy. Nobody sees any of the data. It stays inside your own machines, and it'll be better than what's in the cloud today, simply because the computing power is just going forward in leaps and bounds. So we have a situation where we have a future that's going to be digital, and we are losing ground. So what if, instead of just relying on these two approaches, we add a third approach? And this was what I would call, we use an infobot along with an individual user interface generator. Now, what does that mean? Well, think of an infobot as an information robot, where it gets its name, as being something that it can look at a computer or a VCR or the thermostat or the television screen, just like a human being would. Doesn't require any physical connection, if you will. It would look at that interface, and if half of the population could figure out what's on there, that's the first target, is 50th percentile human, the human in the middle of the spectrum. So if you can make something that the 50% of the population, the most able 50% could understand, then it could understand it, the infobot. So it can then see, understand, and then it feeds an individual user interface generator, which is something that's crafted for each person. So if the person is deaf-blind, it creates an interface for somebody who's deaf-blind, but not just deaf-blind, because we all know that deaf-blind doesn't describe anything, because you could be have low vision and be hard of hearing, and you fall into that category, all the way down to somebody who has no vision and no light perception and no sound perception. And that's a big spectrum, and you would create different interfaces for people along that spectrum. So the individual interface generator takes the output from the infobot, and it creates an interface for that particular individual. And it creates not an interface like a screen reader creates an interface for your computer. That's not really, it's not creating a new interface. That's an audio interface to a visual interface to a computer. So it's an audio interface to an interface that's designed to be presented to somebody who has really broad bandwidth visual input. And that's really not a very good way of providing access for somebody who's blind. Instead, an individual user interface generator would generate for a blind person the interface that would be on all products if everybody were blind. In other words, it would be born blind interface, if you will. It would be the interface that is born assuming that it's going to be used by somebody who is blind, but not just somebody who's blind, but somebody who is blind who has this level of vision, this level of technical expertise, this level of intellectual processing capability, this level of talent for doing spatial recognition, if you will. And these differ amongst all of us. There are those of us who have really great spatial and map sense, and some of us who just can look at a map and it makes no sense. And it's not based on intelligence. We have people that are at the top of their fields who, when COVID came along, couldn't figure out how to show up. Professors at the top of their field who couldn't figure out how to show up for their classes in Zoom because after a month, they still couldn't figure out how to reliably use Zoom. These are not people who are not bright. They're a lot brighter than I am, but they just don't have a technical talent. And I don't have a talent in their field for linguistics or whatever else that they do. So the individual interface generator for the first time could generate an interface to this content and to the controls and everything else that made sense to somebody with all levels, all types, all degrees, and all combinations of disability. And we don't have that today at all. And these interfaces at first can be designed by consumers who would have these different types, combinations, and levels of disability, and people working with them to be for that particular type of individual, instead of trying to design something for all blind people, for example, which we don't. We always end up designing things for bright blind people and technically oriented blind people. And then we think that we're really good and we leave the field and we leave all of the people who are not able to use these interfaces behind. And we do it all the time. We're making progress. We try and keep moving down that stack, if you will. But we're not getting there. So if we could do this, how would we do this and how would it work? Well, first of all, the infobot would be the responsibility of mainstream. There would be a large public open source infobot that could be used by anybody doing things for people with disabilities, that would be used to interpret. You could aim it at any digital interface and it would generate the abstraction of it, which would be fed to an IUIG. IUIGs could be designed by AT manufacturers, they could be designed by clinicians, they could be designed by consumers themselves. The only ones that'll really be successful, I think, are ones that'll be a combination of all three of those. AT companies creating tools and structures and frameworks, and then people work with disabilities and those working with them, depending upon their level and skills, shaping those to be the way they particularly like or what works for them. And then whenever they look at an interface, they would get an interface that made sense to them. Now, some of the advantages of this are that for those of us who are growing older, we slowly get to the point where it's harder and harder for us to learn new things. They talked about crystallized intelligence, where we're really good with old stuff, but we can't learn new stuff very well. Well, one advantage of the IUIG is that it can either adapt over time to include new ideas as they come out, or for people who can't learn new, they could continue to provide the same basic standard interface. I don't know about you, but when I go to my television and I turn on HBO and Apple TV and what are some of the other ones, Disney, they all do basically the same thing, except each one of them does it completely differently, which is very confusing. And then what's worse is that every 6 months or a year, they decide that either because they got a new designer who needs to strut their stuff, or because somebody in the accounting department figured out if you rearrange the interface, it generates more revenue. The interface all changes. And where you used to always find something, it's not there anymore. Your list of your favorites isn't where it used to be anymore. The continue watching, you click on it and it takes you someplace, but you want to see which episode you're on, but you can't. It'll only take you to the episode. You have to go to a different place to get to the same program to be able to see whether or not what the episodes are and whether or not you missed an episode or this is the latest episode or what. Very confusing for all of us. And you can imagine what it is for people who can't deal with complexity and abstraction. You can have an interface. It could be organized the way it makes sense to them. And when they pointed to each different service, it could provide at their option, either the way the service wants to present it, or in a way that they can understand and use it. And then as they change them, the interface, the IUIG coming out of it would stay the same, because they're basically the same thing. They're just interfaces. Not only that, but the logic that's used for the television set when they go to the thermostat, which just got replaced when they moved into their new place, and it used to be a nice little dial, and now it's this little computer interface. And when you walk up to it, it changes, like they don't know why it changes, but it does. And when you touch it, it then changes to a different interface yet again. And you have to know the secret code to get it to go in to change the settings. And each one is different. They would all look the same, and they would look in a fashion that made sense and would make sense from the way everything else operates. In other words, the world that they work with would work more logically. So much better fit, reaching all sorts of people we can't do. For the first time, the disability community could focus its time not on trying to get industry to do something that's really impossible for it to do. We keep asking industry to try and create its products so everybody can use them, and yet we don't know how to. If somebody comes to me, and they do quite often, and asks me, how do I design this thing to work for people with disabilities? And I say, well, which disabilities? And if they don't say all disabilities, then that's the first lecture. And when they do, I say, okay, well, tell me what it is, and I'll call my experts that I know in each of the different disabilities, and we'll put together ideas and figure out how to do this. And it's like, you don't know how to do this across all disabilities? How am I supposed to learn this in the company? And how am I supposed to train all of my designers? You spend your time full-time doing this, and you don't know how to design things to reach all people and all disabilities? I have teams, they roll over. Every year people leave and other people join. This is an impossible task, and it is. So instead of that, what we do is have them focus in on doing the kinds of things that they can, that are within their reach, that they figure out how to make the products as usable by as many people as they can. And they also make sure that everything they create works with the Infobot. Now, this is kind of like saying it's AAT compatible, except there's nothing they need to do to their design except make it used by half of the population. And presumably they can make one usable by at least half of the population. And if we can do that, and we can design the Infobot to be as smart and as able as the 50th percentile. Can't do that today, but we can, I think, in the near future. Then everybody else that isn't reached, and they don't have to stop at 50. They can try and universally designed all the way down as far as they want to. But for those who can't, for those who don't even try, we have an infobot kind of a solution. And it, as long as they can design something that half the people could use, everybody would then be having an interface that they could use using an IUIG. So the biggest benefit is access, that we finally get access for all sorts of a large part of the population that we don't reach at all today. At the same time, we race ahead with digitization, which is a real serious problem. We spend more time on the disability side on trying to figure out what works. We could actually go back and say, how would I design a person with this combination and this type and degree and combination of disability? Because we've never done that. We've always busy just trying to look at what the general things are and then spend the rest of our time trying to work with industry to try and see if we can't figure out how to get them to do this for everything they do. And they try, and some try really hard, and still we don't. Even the ones that try really, really hard don't reach a lot of people that we need to be reaching. By having the large open source infobot, a lot of the real high-tech, real expensive stuff is handled for us. That makes AT vendors can focus less. I don't know if you know this, but screen reader manufacturers spend an enormous amount of time just keeping their stuff so that it can access the information on the computer. And changes in how it presents it to the user are few and far between and haven't changed that much in a long time. They would then be able to focus on being able to create interfaces that work for more people with disabilities. They would focus on what they should be focusing on, which is not repairing their engines so they don't break every time there's a new type of AT coming out, but a new type of ICT coming out, but in fact, building it so that it'll work with more and broader populations and people with combinations of disabilities as well. What does it require? Advances in machine vision, advances in AI, development of this interface socket, if you will, development of IUIGs for all the different types, degrees, and combinations of disability. There's a lot that needs to happen before we can do this, but we're starting to map out a research agenda. You will find it at the link that I posted before, and I will post again now, where we're actually, you can see some of the presentations leading up to this, and then we're beginning to create a research agenda for the next 10 to 20 years, so that by the time we get out there where we've gone beyond all of our current accessibility strategies, we have new strategies to match them. Now, you will see some of these things we're talking about coming to play already. In the next 5-10 years, there are ways we're tapping these new technologies to create solutions today, but the real benefit is going to come when we can reach this point where we can create custom interfaces for people on the fly for everything that they encounter. And I'm going to close with just one comment, and that is that we do not make things accessible or people's lives accessible when we make one product in their life accessible. It's like a three-legged stool, okay? Making sure that you've got one of those legs that's sturdy enough to support this person is not good, and neither is it two. You have to have all three, or the person can't really use the stool. And the same thing, if we want people to live independently, it doesn't help that we have one product. It has to be all of the products in their environment, all of the digital interfaces in their environment need to be accessible to them, or they can't live independently. Thank you. And I apologize to the sign language interpreter for talking so quickly and trying to jam this all into this short period.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We have a couple minutes, 1 minute. If we have a couple of questions, we can do it really quickly before we take a break for our last session. If you have any questions, please comment in the chat box, and then we can look at it and give it to and have that conversation with you.
And I posted I posted my email too, so you can also write me afterwards. Go ahead.
Yes. There is a lot of discussions about AI right now, ranging from the potential as a national security threat and the impact for misinformation issued with AI literature. How do we keep the benefit of AIs for a disabled community from being drawn out in the conversations?
Okay. First of all, take all of the problems that people with disabilities face that everybody else faces and take them off your agenda, because everybody is working on them. Don't waste our disability time efforts, focusing on the fact that a person with disability can be misled when everybody can be misled. Now, if you say, well, but they can be misled in specific ways, that's important. And that's important to feed into the conversation so that they understand that it's that there are specific interactions between disability and AI that might be a problem beyond what they're already considering. And they're already considering people are old and who don't understand and are confused and things like this. So that's covered. A lot of the problem with AI is people using them for something other than what they're good at. The large language models are based upon looking at language and language structure. And what they found out is if you ask them a question, they'll try to answer it. And they've now tuned them to try to do that. But they're not really, their underlying fundamentals are language. And so there's all sorts of ways we can use them as language prostheses and orthoses, things to help people with disabilities around language issues that they're really good at. Trying to talk to them about God and existentialism and I am because I am, or whatever, that's not the place. And you trip them up and you can confuse them. You can make them think they're a monkey, but that's not the way to use them. Figure out how to use the tools. There's a whole bunch of ways, rich ways we can use them now while they're working out ways that they can improve them to be doing other things for everybody.
Thank you for answering that question. I think we don't have, if anyone have one more question, we can answer it before we sign off. Is there any other questions if you want to put in comments or anything like that? Or else we can end up this amazing session. And I hope that you guys are going to have an amazing day. Thank you so much for being part of this.
I also posted the Future of Interface link, and you can click on that one so you can see that. And somebody asked about culture and language differences in IUIG, and yes, absolutely, that's going to be really critical to creating effective IUIGs, because language translation is also one of the things that's going to be much better, including idioms, which right now get translated in very terrible ways. And I'll end with one old story of where they took something and translated into Russian and then back to see what would happen. And they put in, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And they translated to Russian and it came back, the vodka is good, but the meat is rotten. So we will end with that one. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I think we are coming back around 2. Is that right, Stephanie or Ron?
That is correct. So that'll be in a different link though. So we'll leave this open a little bit to copy the chat. We're doing our best we can to live tweet everything. We have a couple folks online and we'll try to copy all of this, but I love that last quote. The vodka is good, but the meat is rotten. Excellent.
That was very, very long time ago. It's much better now, but it shows you the problems.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much, Greg, for joining us. And we will see you in our next session 2 and with a different link. I hope you guys see you later.